and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Helen McGrath, Head of Public Affairs, and Dennis Hall, LLG Bulletin Editor.
Hi, everyone.
Well, the LLG team are still recovering from our successful spring conference, both in person in Birmingham and, of course, online last week. We are also still celebrating the winners from our fabulous awards ceremony, and congratulations to every one of them. Last week's bulletin provided summaries of the plenary programme, so this week the podcast is going to highlight what's going on in all the local government world news. Dennis, I've missed our little chat. What have you got first?
Well, yes, me too. As you know, Helen, governance in its broadest sense was front and centre at several of the plenary sessions at the spring conference. But how relevant is it when councils go bankrupt? A term not, of course, strictly accurate. The latest are Woking and now Thurrock. But what factors lie at the heart of the matter when these failures occur? Is it governance? Is it a failure of leadership? Or is it the absence of checks and balances that would prevent these things happening in the first place? So here's my report on that Woking case. Winning in the roller coaster business of commercial property speculation is hard at the best of times. But these were not the best of times. Since the financial crisis of 2008-9, commercial property prices nosedived. This is territory for small c conservative financing and strong risk management safeguards. But would good governance have made a difference to the outcomes in a case like this? What about the monitoring officer's role in these situations? What about political and leadership culture? What really is at the heart of the matter when a council goes rogue? Property speculation is not the sort of marketplace, you'd think, for a small borough council in Surrey to borrow up to the eyeballs in an attempt to offset a squeeze on budgets elsewhere. But read the Section 114 notice issued by Woking Borough Council the other week. In effect, we're bust, it says, and be amazed at the numbers. Looking at council tax receipts, Woking is thought to be the most indebted local authority in history, beating even the tiny Spelthorne Council, where the crisis occurred in 2020 after a £1.1 billion investment spree. And this line from Woking's own 114 notice captures the size of the mess. It says, if the additional charges of £75 million in each year were to be funded by service reductions, this would mean the council could no longer afford to provide any services at all. But my question is this: how did it happen? The pre-2020 arrangements by which local authorities could fund investment by borrowing from the Public Works Loan Board were notoriously loose. Disaster was already anticipated in Parliament. But does misguided buccaneering ambition plus bad luck with the pandemic explain the full extent of the mess in Woking? Are there checks and balances that were absent in the first place? Now, I know that governance was discussed at the spring conference in a variety of contexts, as with the importance of culture and the nature of leadership. But I do wonder what, if anything, might have changed the path that Woking ultimately took in this instance. Well, we'll have to await the Commissioner's report for the full story.
Well, LLG are currently exploring, along with Grant Thornton, Solace and SIPFA, why actions are not taken by individuals when poor governance is at play to prevent a disaster. Findings should be available in the autumn. Now, reported in the MJ and elsewhere, at the opening of the COVID inquiry, Baroness Hellert pledged to answer 3 key questions. Was the UK properly prepared? Was the response appropriate? And can we learn lessons for the future? The COVID inquiry has heard that Whitehall was unprepared for the outbreak and that there was poor planning in the decade of austerity before 2020. Of note was that the Department of Health and Social Care did not even have an up-to-date contact list of public health directors when the pandemic began, which places it somewhat in perspective. Regional health officials have said that the plan that did exist meant a top-down approach that left them in the dark, learning about new policies and guidance at the same time as members of the public at the daily 5 p.m. broadcasts. The Association for Public Health Directors stated, "It is widely felt that the local voice was not wanted or heard. Well, Sam Jacobs, representing the Trade Union Congress, described the government's workflow from pandemic preparedness and response as a visual and striking representation of a fragmented system, which looks more like a bowl of spaghetti than a clear and coordinated framework for a cogent national response. This week, the inquiry will hear from David Cameron, Jeremy Hunt, and Sir Chris Whitty, and we'll no doubt pick this up again in the podcast next week. Dennis.
My next topic is equality, diversity, and inclusion. It is always in the news, and LLG's own EDI survey was a key feature in our spring conference programme. And here's more now on the latest SRA research just published. Research for the SRA suggests that spending time and energy challenging stigma and stereotypes could be one of several issues behind an ethnicity attainment gap in legal professional assessments. After a pilot study of the solicitor's qualifying examination found that white candidates generally performed better than Black, Asian, and other minority ethnic candidates, the SRA appointed the University of Exeter to investigate the reasons behind the attainment gap. The regulator has just published the findings of the first stage of the research in the form of a systemic literature review. The review covered more than 200 UK and international academic, government, and professional reports and articles. The findings suggest exam outcomes are affected by factors such as how well students feel that they fit into their place of education, the availability of support for minority groups, their belief in how they might succeed in an elitist profession, and their experience of being part of a minority group. For instance, negative experiences mean students are dedicating time and energy on coping strategies to counteract and challenge stereotypes and stigma, which could signal a depletion of resources on achieving professional success. SRA Chief Paul Phillips said, "We know that there is a long-standing and worrying pattern of different outcomes for candidates from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic backgrounds in the study of law. We want to know why this is happening in law and to develop a plan to address this where we can. This independent research is the first step in better understanding what reasons lie behind the picture we're seeing. A final report will be published in spring 2024.
Now, I met with the Legal Services Board last week to better understand their work in the field of professional ethics, rule of law, and regulation in the wake of several high-profile incidents, including NDAs, the post office scandal, and strategic lawsuits against public participations, otherwise known as SLAPPs, and I'll come back to those in a bit. Amongst the main themes being explored by the LSB is the need for a cultural shift in the profession towards the understanding of their role as lawyers in society to uphold the rule of law and consider the public interest, and that a clear framework was also required to allow lawyers to, quote, proactively navigate and test their professional ethical decision-making and guide how they will take these decisions, depending on context and facts, and for regulators to address manifestations of poor conduct as they arise. You'll be aware, and Dennis has discussed previously, the pressures on general counsel within in-house commercial entities, and there are numerous parallels between them and the MO of a local authority. Now, back to SLAPPs. The Gazette reported that strategic litigation against public participation will be defined in law for the first time under amendments to the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Bill, currently at report stage in the House of Lords. This will give judges new early dismissal powers against lawsuits designed purely to evade scrutiny and stifle freedom of speech. However, the measures will relate only to cases connected with economic crime. Law Society President Lubna Shuja had said in response that, quote, "We understand why the government is implementing these measures. However, as only cases related to economic crime are covered, this means that some claimants may still use SLAPPs to stifle scrutiny." I agree with Lubna. It seems a missed trick personally not to extend the scope. Dennis, what's your last item today?
Helen, I was fascinated by the piece from Warwickshire in the Spring Conference programme on improving social mobility in the law and how they found new pathways into the profession. The announcement last week of new legal T levels as opposed to A levels might also support these novel ideas. Here's more on this. A post-GCSE vocational course introduced by the government nearly 3 years ago will be available for legal services this autumn. This is the new T level. The Department for Education expects T levels to become one of the main choices for students after GCSEs and alongside apprenticeships, A levels and other qualifications not served by current A or T levels. T levels have been designed in collaboration with employers and education providers to give students practical, knowledge-based learning. They include a minimum 9-week placement with an employer. The DFE hopes eventually to make T levels available in 24 subjects. A report published by the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education has just revealed that a T level in legal services will become available from September. Students doing a T level in legal services will develop an understanding of a broad range of issues relevant to the sector, including the business environment, regulation, professionalism and ethics, security and risk, and the fundamentals of financial accounting. Students also have to complete at least one module of occupation-specific content. The legal services T level consists of 2 legal assistant occupational specialisms: business finance and employment, and crime, criminal justice, and social welfare. While T levels are based on the same standards as apprenticeships, they differ in their approach. T levels are designed to prepare students for work, further training, or further study. Apprenticeships are typically suited to those wanting to earn a wage and learn at the same time. The Institute said in its report that apprenticeships were already making a mark, referring to data published already by the Solicitors Regulation Authority, which shows that solicitor apprentices outperforming other candidates in the solicitor's qualifying examination. This is all very interesting, and the T level could become another useful tool to further social mobility in the legal profession.
Absolutely, I was fascinated to read this new qualification, and LLG will definitely look to plan how this might be integrated into our recruitment campaign. Now, finally from me, a little whistle-stop tour of the news, which you can get far more detail on by visiting the local government lawyer website. So the local government social care ombudsman has criticised a pair of authorities over complaint handling after finding significant issues with their procedures. Nigel Ellis, Chief Executive, reminds us all that getting the basics right, communication, accountability, the desire to improve, and above all, keeping the person at the heart of the complaint is still as important as ever. Elsewhere, the Best Value report into Thurrock is out. It found that a dereliction in political and managerial leadership and inadequate governance arrangements allowed the council to embark on a risky investment strategy that ultimately landed it in more than £1 million of debt. Also in the news, the Local Government Association has said that the government must reconsider and include population health as a consideration in environmental outcome reports that it plans to replace strategic environmental assessments and environmental impact assessments with. And if you want to understand Section 114 notices a little better, or even Section 114 reports, you can read all about them in an article on the local government lawyer website written by our very own Deputy Vice President, Paul Turner. And on that note, that's it for another edition of the LLG podcast. We'll see you next week, but until then, it's goodbye from me.
And from me too.